Hi, I'm Barry. That's the first stage completed, and now we're on to the second stage. I'm really pleased with how it's looking at the moment, especially sort of this section here. And again, I think I'm trying to sort of copy Andrew here, so we'll see how we get on with it.
Yes, very good.
Let's get ready to the next stage. Again, you can see that it's still wet. Okay, it's important that we keep this glaze, this scumble glaze open, so we're able to manipulate the paint. That's one of the important things for the special finishes.
Great,
Okay,
fantastic.
Right,
what we're going to do next, Barry, we just want to create a little bit more texture in the surface to create more realism. So we use natural sea sponges,
yeah.
And we'll just add a little bit. These are damp.
Yeah.
They don't work very well when they're coarse and dry, and so we dampen them, which we did earlier. So the paint that we used earlier for when we brushed in the background with the feather, we can just add a little bit of paint to the surface, because if we don't apply some paint on here, the sponge will just take away the paint that is on the surface already. That's great, yeah, that will work nicely. So what we want to do, we just want to go, just work around the vein.
Not actually on it.
Yeah, just around it, that's right, and mainly in the lozenge shapes. So I tend to have the darker colour here, and then going into this space here, we'll just fade it out. And then once we come to soften that later, it makes it even more realistic. And having all these dots of kind of dark Payne's grey within there, it kind of helps to make it look even more real. And it's just nice to create a bit of texture in the surface, and the sponge is the quickest and easiest way to do that. We can just break up the vein a little bit with the sponge. There's so many different white Carrara marbles, it's difficult to go wrong in terms of depth of colour. Some Carrara marble is very, very dark veining, and then you have very, very pale white Carrara marble where there's hardly any veining at all. So here we're kind of achieving kind of middle of the road, like quite a kind of subtle veining going through, which I think is more pleasing to the eye. It looks better than if it's a very strong black line going through. So no, that's good, Barry. That's very good. That's nicely sponged. So again, once we've gone with the sponge, we'll use the badger hair softener again, and that will just soften those that kind of stipple. It is, yeah, that's right. There's a nice bit of texture on the surface.
And this is just an all over sort of, not following anything, just following?
Yep, I kind of go crisscross at this point, so I'm kind of softening everything. All the sponging that I've done. Again, we don't want to over soften, else it ends up making it look a bit cloudy and a bit blended. Right, what we'd like to do now, Barry, in white Carrara marble you quite often get very sharp veins, but very, very fine veins, and this helps. We have this in a lot of marbles, but I'm using this water-soluble pencil. Yeah. You can use ordinary pencils as well. This is just a black Stabilo water-soluble pencil, and what I'm going to do, Barry, I'm just going to follow this vein again, but with how we've naturally used the sponge, it's created all sorts of textures and lines, and if we imagine like a river going through, we can just follow like the cracked veins, and what we'll do, we'll rotate the pencil as we're coming down, and then we can have those kind of sharp lines as we've had before. Yeah. But you don't have to do all the way through. We can just lift the pencil, and if you end up drawing a big black line, it's very obvious. But if we can be very subtle and then just lift the pencil up a little bit, so you've got different strengths of the pencil. Yeah. Because the veins kind of naturally undulate and move, all right?
And again, I guess the good thing with this is, if you make a mistake, just wipe it off, start again.
That's right.
And just, the more you practice this, the better you're going to get.
Absolutely, that's right.
Let's give this a go. And then just put one in and then soften it?
Yep, we can soften that. Yep. So again, we can work at right angles, and then you can go with the grain and then go at 90 degrees. And that just helps the, obviously the scumble glaze is still wet, and it just helps it to be nice and cloudy, but still maintaining an element of sharpness in the vein. That's right, yeah. We can always dab that out with a rag if we need to, Barry. So we could spend a lot of time on this. You can create like a marble effect, or you can actually really replicate the marble. And I've spent, sometimes we've done pieces of furniture or fire surrounds or pillars, and if the client's happy to pay for our time, then we can make it look even more realistic. And then, so this is a good basic white Carrara marble. We've got all the elements in there that are in white Carrara marble, but we could allow this to dry, and then we could go over it again, and then we get even greater depth. Traditionally, this would have all been done in oil, and you can get some really good effects with oil base. You can get even more depth, but the difficulty with oil, it tends to yellow over years, and then you feel like you need to redo it after a few years. But with the acrylics, it stays nice and white for a long period of time, and it dries a bit faster. That's very good, Barry. You've done very well there. Yeah, you've got some nice depth there. You've got the nice cloudy background, and then you have the sharp veining going through there with the black pencil. So
what's the next stage now? Would you be happy with that now, or was that?
Yeah, I'd be quite happy with this. I would allow this to dry, and then we could apply more paints and glazes over the top to get even more depth, to make it look even more translucent and glass marble-like. Okay. Yeah. That's fine. So what we can do, we can take off the edges of the masking tape, and that really shows and highlights and makes the panel look very nice. And then this panel could be shown to clients, or
yeah, so part of like a student's portfolio kind of thing.
Absolutely, that's right.
Okay, so that's mine finished. I'm sort of quite pleased with that. There's some sort of areas I think that maybe a bit too dark. I don't know what you sort of think, Andrew.
Yeah, I think overall it's very good, Barry. You've got the depth there, maybe just a bit too consistent with the black lining, the heavy black lining. Yeah. But I think that's a really good start. I think next time just hold the pencil a little bit lighter. Yeah. And then maybe not all the way through, and then I think that's a really good start, Barry. Well done.
Brilliant. Let's have a look at yours then.
Yeah, sure. That's fine. Okay. Yeah, there we go. It's a little bit more subtle. That's just a good background, a good starter for white Carrara marble. And yeah, we could, as we say, we could let that dry, and then we can build up with even more depth and make it even more realistic and even finer veining.
Yeah, I noticed with mine, I haven't quite got these sort of mountainous peaks, and I haven't got the breaks and things like that, but that's really, really good.
That is quite a difficult technique to perfect, because it's quite a strong pigment within the pencil, but it's just practice. Yeah. Best thing with this, you can always wipe it off and just keep practicing and practicing. That's how I started. Yeah.
So you think in terms of a student, if you to spend sort of a day doing this kind of thing, you could probably achieve these kind of results?
So yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's fine. It's once you've learned how to manipulate the paints, then you can go from white Carrara, and then you can apply the similar techniques to other marbles.
Brilliant. Right, we'll get on doing this marvellous fireplace up.